Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, October 5th, 2020, and I'm guessing from the title of this video, we're going to be taking a look at a 2020 Senate map and getting the Democrats to 60 Senate seats. Now, I will be making a video about this for the Republican Party. Just the Democratic Party is the current favorite to win the Senate, so I'm starting off with them, and then I will make one tomorrow for the GOP. Disclaimer, this is not a prediction. This is not a realistic scenario. I'm just going to the states where it is possible that the Democrats win pickups, and then on top of that, giving them unimaginable seats, but states that aren't necessarily 100% an absolute for the GOP. Every single state that goes to the Democrats and reaches them, gives them 60 seats, has at least a greater than 1% chance that the Democrats do win there. So if we're looking at a blue Alabama and a blue Montana, there's a reason why. And if we're looking at the Republican seats, a number of these safe seats are states where the Democratic Party has less than a 1% chance of victory. So even if I was to draw them to 60, I wouldn't go through these states. It's not as if Idaho is going to vote as right as Kentucky. So when we're taking a look at the map, keep that in mind. We'll start off with obviously the safe Democratic states. We're going to go ahead and load up my logo really quickly and then move over to the Halloween filter just because it does look really nice. It does look kind of weird, but then again, you stare at the same dark map for the past 11 months. Might as well add something different. Occasionally, I'll move back and forth. Right now, we're going to use the Halloween theme. Again, if you have a problem with that, comment it down below. I just want to see your guys' opinion on the use of the map background. But right now, we're staying with it. So 35 toss-up seats. Normally, we have around 33, 34. There are two special elections this year, one in Georgia, one in Arizona. Arizona's seat that is up right now will also be up in 2022. So the next midterm cycle, you can expect that race to be as competitive. If it's Martha McSally, that would be crazy, just running 2 years after another 2 years. But it isn't likely to be here. So we're going to start off with the safe Democratic states. I don't think any of these come as a surprise to really anyone. Obviously, states in the Northeast. New Hampshire has been moved into the safe Democratic column, as has Minnesota. These two states are going to be pretty solid, very solid for the Democrats. Virginia and New Mexico as well. These are safe states. Now, Virginia, Minnesota, New Mexico, and New Hampshire, it's not as if the Republican Party has a less than 1% chance of victory in all 4 of them. The Republican Party has a 2% chance of victory in New Hampshire, but all in all, these states, we know how they're going to go, and we have a general idea of where the expected vote share is. So, actually, I think Virginia may be the only state where the Republican Party has a less than 1% chance of victory, but still, these states are safe. We are going to be peeling into some safe Republican states, obviously, to get to 60, because it is a very unrealistic scenario. It's just where can we see it happening? Now, if the Democratic Party had their best case scenario, if they ran, or they did run, very good candidates, but if they had very good results across the nation, we could see them possibly getting 55, 56 seats if everything goes to plan. But this 60-seat, filibuster-proof majority just doesn't seem too likely. It almost happened actually in 2008. If you weren't too attentive during the 2008 election cycle, I can tell you much that I wasn't entirely fully aware of what was happening back then. The Democratic Party had over 250 seats in the House of Representatives. They also finished the 2008 elections with 59 Senate seats, and for a brief period of time, they had 60 seats in the Senate. And, they had Democrats from Nebraska, and they had Democrats in the South. They dominated the South in terms of House districts. It was insane, the reach that the Democratic Party had under President Obama. And I think that's a very good testament as to his ability to turn out voters. But again, we're looking at an election where the Democratic Party is trying to get similar turnout to Obama's first election. So what's to say that some of these states couldn't move over? Now let's go down to the likely states that we know are probably going to vote for the Democratic Party. That includes states as Michigan and Colorado and Arizona. Now, some of these states might end up being lean by the time we hit the election, but if there is a scenario where the Democrats do hit 60, the entire map shifts to the left, obviously, because certain, say, Republican states are now going to be tilt Democrat, which means almost all of the other states move with it, but generally these states are likely, at this point, probably 12, 13-point margins for the Democrats. Let's move over to some other states that I guess, at this point, are considered true toss-ups. Obviously, the Democrats are going to have a little bit of trouble pulling from the remaining 22. They need 12 out of the remaining 22, but they actually are leading in some of them right now. So we're going to move Maine into the likely Democratic column just because of the fact, again, the entire map shifts to the left. North Carolina is also going to join that likely Democratic characterization. Now, Biden wins the presidency, we officially hit a majority for the Democratic Party, because whichever political party holds the vice presidency, that's the political party that holds power if there's a 50-50 tie. That may not have been explained too well. So if it's 50-50, the vice president, of course, is the president of the Senate. So whichever political party the vice president registers under takes the majority. They take the majority leader role. Pretty much everything the normal majority would have ends up going to whichever party is in power in the White House in the event of a 50-50 tie. So 20 toss-up seats. How are we going to take 10 of those and give them to the Democrats and allocate the remaining 10 towards the GOP? Now, it isn't too hard to see where the GOP could still hold on to seats. Obviously, Idaho, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Oklahoma, we're going to stop at this half of the country, are obviously going to go to the Republican Party. Now, the Democratic Party has made it obvious they are making a play for these 4 toss-up seats on this half of the United States: Alaska, Texas, Kansas, and Montana. The unfortunate reality for the GOP is, despite all 4 of these states solidly going for President Trump in 2016, 14 points or higher with the exception of Texas, which was a 9-point margin of victory for President Trump 4 years ago, they were very solid. I mean, the Democratic Party is now leading in, or not leading, but very competitive in 3 out of these 4 seats. Now, Texas is actually the one that's moved over to the a little bit rightward of the rest of these, but in this scenario, the Democrats would be carrying Montana. They would be carrying Kansas. Barbara Boyer is not running too far behind her Republican opponent. She actually has a 21% chance at victory. 1 in 5 for a Democrat in Kansas. Not bad whatsoever. You flip over to the presidential race and you scroll down over into Kansas, well, you're not really going to see Joe Biden with the same chance of winning that state. Let's go ahead and find it. He has a 6% chance. So obviously the Senate, much better for the Democrats in Kansas specifically. The expected vote share is 51.8 to 45.2. Not bad at all. All this would need is just a 6-point swing, which obviously is traditionally unrealistic, but we are working in an unrealistic time zone or time period for this map, assuming everything goes to plan for the Democrats. So Kansas goes blue, Montana goes blue. What about Alaska? Why is Alaska competitive? Well, if you haven't been watching a lot of my Senate election predictions, you have to realize Dan Sullivan is in for a bit of trouble. Now, actually, Joe Biden does do a little bit better on the national map. Let's take a look at Alaska on the presidential race, and we'll see that Biden actually has a 20% chance of victory here. Dan Sullivan is expected to do better than Donald Trump, but let's say the race does get closer. It is possible the Democrats do end up winning there. Now, look at the expected vote share. 43.3% for Al Gross, 51.6% for Dan Sullivan. That is by no means super solid for a GOP candidate in a state that traditionally votes for them by very solid margins. I will say Alaska has been a surprise to us all, and in this scenario, it would require Alaska going blue, which in this case would go to Al Gross, who is an independent, who more likely than not will caucus with the Democratic Party. Now we'll come back to Texas because that would be a tilt Democratic state. We'll move there when necessary. Now let's take a look at Iowa. This is a state where Teresa Greenfield would probably have to carry it by a lean margin. That's not out of the question. It's very possible she wins it by a lean margin. It's just, a state that would be required to go to the Democrats. Obviously, this one's in contention. Is actually, I believe, the closest Republican race at this point. Yeah, Joni Ernst has a 51% chance at victory here. Teresa Greenfield at 49%. It's neck and neck. And right now, she only has a 0.2% lead. It's going to be very close. That's going to be a race we're watching through the end of the evening. They close their polls at 10 p.m., so we probably will be waiting quite some time. So, 54 Democratic seats, 11 toss-up seats. Let's see where the Republicans get around 3 more seats. I don't think these are too surprising. We're going to go to Arkansas, then Louisiana, and can you guess the next one? Tennessee. It's neighboring Tennessee. Now, Tennessee is an open race. You'd normally think that an open race does have a mildly competitive race, or mildly competitive Senate race, but it really just doesn't. I mean, when Phil Bredesen ran in 2018, it was competitive because he was a former governor. Now, he still lost by 10%, but that was very good for a Democrat in Tennessee, especially in a year that favored the GOP in the United States Senate. Tennessee went solidly for President Trump. Marsha Blackburn, of course, was elected that year. I believe she was a previous representative. I could be wrong about that, but she went on to be the next senator from Tennessee. Now the Democrats are running someone who is a little bit leftward. I mean, it was a very surprising victory for the Democrats in Tennessee, but it just isn't going blue. The Democrats are running behind the Republican by 25%. So Tennessee goes safe for the GOP. Now, where do the Democrats get more of their numbers? Well, they get it from Georgia. These are 2 states that, if they do end up moving in favor of the Democrats, it is possible that they move into lean margins for both Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock. Let's take a look at Georgia's first race. Now, Georgia is the only state on this map with 2 Senate races up this election cycle. In this scenario, David Perdue and Jon Ossoff run against each other. Jon Ossoff likely makes it to a runoff and wins the runoff. But generally, Jon Ossoff would do better if Trump is reelected in the runoff, but that's a whole nother issue. But Jon Ossoff would actually have to win the state of Georgia, and it's honestly not too far-fetched. He has a 1 in 4 chance at victory here. He's not the favorite, but it's not impossible by any means. Let's take a look at the popular vote share. I mean, it has been narrower before, but right now, David Perdue is expected to run ahead of him by 3%. Now, Jon Ossoff has never been the favorite to win this race, but all he needs to do is outperform these numbers by 2-3%, and boom, he's the next United States Senator from Georgia. Let's take a look at the special election. Raphael Warnock is the leading Democrat right now, and there are 2 leading Republicans, actually. There is Kelly Loeffler and Doug Collins, both of which are statewide officials. Kelly Loeffler was actually appointed as the incumbent senator in this Georgia special election. And the Democrats are making a play for it. Now, the problem for the Democratic Party is they need to make it into the runoff. There is no possibility that they win an absolute 50% vote share. That just isn't going to happen. Kelly Loeffler and Doug Collins are putting the Democrats at risk as they are both running around the same margin. So it's possible the Republicans end up with 2 Republicans in the runoff, and obviously that would just end up with 1 Republican in the Senate. Doesn't matter who. But Raphael Warnock, he could end up in the runoff, and if that does happen, it would need to go to the Democrats to get them closer to 60. Now, there are 6 toss-up races. The Democrats only need 4 out of the remaining 6, and I know that sounds surprising. This is not too realistic of a scenario, but almost all of the states that I've flipped so far are not completely out of the question. Now we're going to start getting into states that are a little iffy, a little bit, super unlikely, if I'm going to put it frankly. We're going to take a look at states such as Alabama and South Carolina, going for the Democrats. Now, if Alabama was to stay in the Doug Jones column, I would say it'll probably be by a lean margin. I think that would be the safest bet. I don't think that it would be tilt. Doug Jones actually has a 1 in 5 chance at victory here, 1 in 4 chance if I'm rounding upwards. It's not too bad. I mean, he's a Democrat in a very solid Republican state. It's very hard for me to see how Tommy Tuberville loses. But also, Doug Jones is the incumbent, so it is kind of difficult. I mean, they started off this race at a much better position for the Democratic Party, but now it has since expanded. Doug Jones is probably going to lose. Taking a look at the recent data here, there's nothing really that benefits him. He's running behind Donald Trump, actually. Or Doug Jones is running behind Joe Biden, actually, statewide, so that isn't exactly the best sign. But all in all, if Alabama was to stay safe, or not stay safe, but end up going to the Democrats, I mean, obviously, we're seeing a number of other states surrounding it go to the Democratic Party, so it'd be a lot more likely. But that's how the Democrats would get to 57 seats. Now, there's 3 remaining toss-up races that they need to win. And honestly, the Democrats have actually made a play for almost all of these. The Republican Party has locked down West Virginia. That's out of the question. But all 4 of these remaining toss-up seats, the Democratic Party is either competitive in this election cycle, or they recently had an election where the Democrats came within 10%. And I'm looking at Mississippi specifically. We're going to get back to Mississippi. We're going to go to South Carolina and put that in the tilt Democratic column. Now, the Democratic Party has a pretty solid chance in South Carolina as well. Like I said, there are a number of scenarios where the Democratic Party does very well and everything would have to go correctly. But following that debate, I really don't see how Lindsey Graham, does very well. Obviously, J.B. Harrison is an underdog. He's running in a very solid Republican state. South Carolina is very solid on the presidential level, or at least it used to be. But I think that J.B. Harrison is trying to tap into the black electorate here that traditionally doesn't vote at high levels. And, South Carolina and Mississippi, these states would be swing states, to say the least, if black turnout was insanely high. And obviously, that just isn't realistic. It is never really insanely high amongst any voting demographic. But if that was to be tapped into, and J.B. Harrison is certainly a candidate to do so, it's possible South Carolina actually goes blue. Because it's not just that Jamie Harrison is winning over minority voters. There are way more white voters than minority voters in South Carolina. But it's the fact that Lindsey Graham, number one, who wasn't exactly liked by the Trump base to begin with, and also some of the Republican Party who may be more inclined to vote for someone like Jamie Harrison, as he said in the debate. They may not agree with him on certain issues, but he, quote, will never lie to them. And Lindsey Graham has gone back on a number of promises, and I don't think that it's partisan to say that he was hypocritical in his statements, either of President Trump or of the Supreme Court vacancy, because both of which he said word for word the opposite, just months later or a year later. For President Trump, when he called him a xenophobic, race-baiting bigot, and then said, quote, literally quoting, "I did not say that," with the same exact tone, with the same exact word, and then moving on to say, Trump is unfit for office before he's elected, saying, I don't know why the media is painting him as unfit for office, whatever it is. I mean, Lindsey Graham is being painted in a very negative fashion, and it is possible that the Democrats do well, they are making a major play for South Carolina, but do in this scenario carry South Carolina and put that in the Democratic column. Now, we need to flip 2 out of the remaining 3 toss-up races. Now, where are we going to get there? Well, Texas, actually, MJ Hager has a better chance of winning Texas than Amy McGrath does at Kentucky. I'm actually going to finish this off by characterizing Mississippi and Texas as tilt Democratic states. For Kentucky, it ended up going to the GOP. Now, I don't think that Kentucky and Texas are super surprising. Realistically, what we see in both Texas and Mississippi is that the Democratic Party has spent a little bit of money there. Kentucky, I mean, the Democratic Party has spent $45 million the last time that fundraising numbers were reported, and that's not even counting this previous month. $45 million in a race that the Democrat has a 4% chance at victory. Not good at all. Mitch McConnell was going to do very well in this Kentucky Senate race. Honestly, you know, in my election night, in the dream scenario for the Democrats, I ousted Mitch McConnell just because I thought that would be much more momentous for the Democrats than winning a Senate race in Mississippi if I was to get them to 60. But realistically, Mississippi would flip before Kentucky. And that's a very harsh reality for Democrats, knowing that Amy McGrath received $45 million, probably going to receive almost $60 million by the end of the campaign season, to only lose by 15%. For Texas, MJ Hager, while individually maybe a strong candidate in House races, I don't think she's going to win on the Senate level. But again, this is a very good scenario, very favorable scenario for the Democratic Party. And if I was to get them to 60, it would go through Texas rather than Kentucky. So this is the final map. Flips in Alaska, Arizona, Colorado, Texas, Kansas, Montana, Iowa, Mississippi, Georgia special election, North Carolina, and Maine. That's a total of 13 flips. The Democrats go from 47 up to 60. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord link for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2020 Senate election videos. If you just want to see other Senate election videos, I'm actually going to be releasing a series of competitive Senate races up through the election. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.